I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. If you hear the sirens in the background, it's because it's a 1 o'clock, first day of the month emergency system test. And so it sounds like it's working, and that's a good thing. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along. I hope you had a wonderful holiday. America celebrated its Independence Day, July 4th. We have all kinds of experiences and stories in our community. My daughter and I talked about, two things. One is the duality of our existence. Number one, should we celebrate a culture that enslaved our people on the one hand? And my response is, yeah, and ought we be joyous in celebrating the ideas of the independence of America? My response is we should be, and we are, because that is the path towards the perfection that we still seek, and that we believe that our people will add to humanity. That the idea of the principles of the Constitution were good ideas, imperfectly implemented. We know the story. They allowed our people to be regarded as three-fifths of a human. It allowed and rationalized our bondage and chattel slavery in this country. But through it all, through our resistance and our persistence, our perseverance, we have changed the country. We have been changed, and we've changed the country. I believe we have changed the world as well. So, 4th of July, I think we celebrate the idea of freedom, even with its imperfections in history. We celebrate the potential, the possibility of achieving true equality among human beings, not only in this country, but around the world. So, yes, we do. Well, listen, as always, I want to thank you for being here. I want you to support this program by subscribing. We're streaming this live on several media platforms, among them YouTube at Insight News MN, YouTube at Black Press USA. We're also on 3 Facebook platforms, the Insight News, Black Press USA, and the Al McFarlane Facebook page. We're on Twitter, and we're on LinkedIn. No matter where you are, we appreciate you checking this out, being with us. Send us a note in the comment. Let us know your name and where you're joining us from. Ask questions, challenge the things that you hear that we say, or bring things to us that we need to be made aware of. This is about building community. It's about having conversations that matter and valuing what we think and what we say. It's critical for our community and for ourselves. Well, we also want to let you know that we are glad for our friends over at the Minnesota Health Department, and they want to invite you to be aware, to get vaccinated. There's an event coming up Saturday, July 15th at Amherst Wilder building over on Lexington Avenue, St. Paul. You can get vaccinated, stay safe, and make sure that everybody in your community, in your family, in your circle follows the COVID protocols and gets vaccinated. With that, I want to begin by what we call our hot topics. And the hot topic for today comes from one of our columnists, Brother Hobbs is a lawyer out of Atlanta, and he has a column in this paper that talks about affirmative action. It's a big issue now. Is affirmative action dead? I'm going to just read a couple of paragraphs of what he wrote. It's available online at insightnews.com. The article says affirmative action never meant affirmative access for Black folks. Again, it's by Chuck Hobbs, something he's published July 1st, updated July 1st. And he says, alas, affirmative action is dead. Just as I predicted in this blog last February, the United States Supreme Court on yesterday abolished nearly 60 years of affirmative action programming by ruling in favor of Students for Fair Admissions, SFFA, a group that challenged diversity admissions policies at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. Writing for the 6-3 conservative majority, Chief Justice John Roberts inscribed, open quote, the student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. Many universities have for too long done just the opposite, and in doing so, they have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. That's what Roberts wrote on June 29th, 2023. Well, Hobbes goes on to write, pardon my strong language, he says, but but the Chief Justice Roberts is telling a goddamn lie in his historical perspective. He writes, as I've stressed for many years in my blogs and articles, from the time that Democratic Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson first started issuing executive orders in the 1960s to affirmatively remedy past discrimination against blacks, all the way through Republican Richard Nixon, who expanded the same, many whites immediately began crying foul while introducing what I often call a legal oxymoron, reverse discrimination against whites. Oxymoron, I submit, because I ask you to answer, when have black people ever had the power to prevent white people from attending school, obtaining bank loans, buying property, eating in a restaurant, trying on clothes, or being treated at a publicly funded hospital? He goes on. It's a good article. Check it out. It's something that we need to talk about. It should be part of our dinner conversation or lunch room conversation in the locker room, or we call it the water cooler conversation, wherever you are. And if you have thoughts about what he has written so far, send a note in the chat, in the comment section. I want to get your point of view. Well, today's program is an excellent one for me personally, and I think for you as well, because we're bringing in the focus and in the conversation one of the legacy institutions of our community and actually of our nation, and that is the Urban League. We're here with the two leaders, young leaders in the Urban League of the Twin Cities. Let me give some background. We had a Minneapolis Urban League for years and years and years, headquartered at the Glover Center for Community Development on the corner of Plymouth and Penn. And we also used to have a Urban League over on Selby Avenue in St. Paul. Over the years, the St. Paul Urban League became less operational and finally ceased to exist. Over the years beyond that, there were lots of discussions about how do we elevate and grow into a single metropolitan organization. Therefore, we've succeeded, our community has succeeded, the Urban League staff and directors have succeeded in creating and rebranding and relaunching the Urban League of the Twin Cities. So I'm pleased today to have two of the leaders in that organization to talk about what they do in particular, to tell their story and tell how critical this work is for our community, to describe some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that lie ahead, and to impart, from my point of view, this is what I expect to happen, the confidence that we need to reflect and reveal our ability to achieve, to succeed, and to change community, to change the lives of families, and to be create milestones in the movement towards justice and equality. Well, here today is Dr. Alvin Akibar. He's the director of the Center for Social Justice Research, Policy, and Advocacy at the Urban League of Twin Cities. Joining him is Catrice L. Williams, Director of Wealth Development. Boy, two good topics. Dr. Akibar and Sister Catrice, welcome to you both to the conversation with Al McFarlane.
Thank
Al,
you.
thank you for the warm welcome.
Well, I'm excited. You know, I mentioned to you off air before we started that the Urban League is dear and personal. I'm a former director of the Minneapolis Urban League, a beneficiary of the leadership of the St. Paul Urban League. The directors there, when I was about your ages, probably in my 20s, these elders provided guidance, support, encouragement, and I can tell you that I'm kind of where I am today because of the visionary and supportive leadership of committed men and women who led the Urban League organization, both in St. Paul and in Minneapolis. And I'm overjoyed that the organizations have merged, and now we have the Urban League of Twin Cities. Finally, I'll say that I have been a director for several terms of the Minneapolis Urban League, my last term serving as the chairman of the board. So I am permanently invested in the legacy and the success of the organization and the great work that it has done and continues to do. With that, Dr. Alvin, let me start with you. How you doing, brother?
Doing well, Al. Thank you. Yeah, I'm here enjoying our time over at the Glover Studies Center, but really just enjoying getting to connect with other folks in the community, especially I think as our interim CEO says, everyone has an Urban League story, and I'm excited to get to learn more about yours. Also, always a pleasure to be in the presence of another Alvin. Doesn't happen too often, although we do have another in the Urban League. So enjoying the day.
Well, talk about the Urban League. Give us an update because, the Urban League went dark like many of our institutions did in COVID. Everything shut down, and people were wondering when and where. And over time, the organization continued to work, but now it's open again. Give us a rundown what happened from COVID to now with the Urban League of Twin Cities and the Glover Studies Center in particular.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I was hired on during the late summer of last year. But prior to that, the Glover Studies Center had to not necessarily shutter its doors, but drastically reevaluate and alter the way that we had been running business for the safety of everyone as the height of the COVID pandemic raged on. So a lot of things were now moved online, moved to appointment only. And so we've been in the process of reopening a lot of our in-person services, as well as keeping some of that remote effectiveness and flexibility. So our building is now open Monday through Friday, including our resource room downstairs. So you just have to come in, sign in at the desk. And I believe we have reception from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. We also have a lot of our staff working remote Mondays and Fridays so that we are still available online as well for a lot of these our immediate services, as well as just for regular communications. But it's definitely been a year of a few years of challenge with COVID era, trying to navigate both, community and even employee safety with the realities that the work we do is being done because there's a need. So it's been definitely kind of walking the tightrope and then really letting folks know, hey, we are still open. We've had to kind of scale upwards over time just to make sure we're doing so in a way that's sustainable in the long term and safe for everyone involved. But we are open here, 2100 North Plymouth Avenue, Glover Studies Center. The only thing I think is that sometimes if there's only a couple folks in the building, the doors will be locked for safety reasons, but our receptionist is there and will come and let you in. The reality is just making sure that everyone who's coming through our doors, whether they work there or just a member of our community, are safe and able to get what they need.
Well, that's wonderful. The building itself is a wonderful facility. And not only are Urban League programs housed there, but in history, different organizations were also housed there. Is that still the same? I know for the longest time, our Congressman Keith Ellison had his district offices at the Urban League building. I thought that was phenomenal that he chose to do what other people do for their communities. He did for our community. Bring the revenue, the contract, the lease into one of our institutions to help stabilize and support the capability. Do you still have other tenants in the building, or is it right now just the Urban League?
We do still have other tenants in the building. So I know right now we house an IT services consulting company, Hennepin County's Community Action Partnership. And I think we're expecting a couple of new tenants that have signed on this summer. And we have a couple offices that we're still seeking tenants for. So if you all have folks who are, if you're interested in being located inside the Glover Studies Center, we invite you to contact our front desk or director of operations. But we thankfully are still trying to be intentional about both, who we allow into the space and what kinds of benefits the community members can have from coming through here and being able to have some kind of a wraparound experience of services within our organization. So it's not just us, but it is intentional community building there.
So let me put you to the test, Dr. Alvin. I want you to give our viewers that might not know something about the history of the Urban League movement, and to the degree that you're able, talk about the development of the Urban League of Minneapolis or Twin Cities. And I know I didn't prep you on this, so we're talking together. Let's just share what we know between us about the importance of this work. I'll start with you.
Okay. I think for me, so our lovely former executive assistant to the CEO, Linda Anderson, and several other members of our organization created a really cool timeline of Urban League events. So finding out that this is one of the oldest chapters in the country and the first place, and then that we've been awarded multiple times for within the National Urban League's recognition of affiliates as being a top affiliate multiple times, especially pre-COVID and pre some of the financial hardships that COVID caused. But I think that tenacity and commitment to the community is one of the things that helped us keep going in the face of some really interesting, challenging, or unprecedented times.
And how would you describe in a nutshell both the vision and the mission of the National Urban League movement? What's the raison d'etre?
Oof. I like to put it as the liberation and well-being of Black people and all people broadly, but especially being for Black people, and realizing that both equal opportunity and equal participation in society that we keep for as we celebrate. My internet just went bugged out for a little bit there. But really realizing the American promise for Black Americans in particular.
And so the Center for Social Justice Research and Policy is a relatively new division. Can you tell us about that and what you are bringing and shaping in capability to serve our community through the center?
Yeah. So I was brought on to head the Center for Social Justice Research, Policy, and Advocacy at Urban League last August. So I will be coming up on a full year next month. So my training is as a psychologist, particularly in the research side of things. And one of the things that I really wanted to bring was a knowledge of health disparities, health policy, and understanding basically how people and systems interact. And so in my time at the center, we've really focused on, one, getting our research agenda off the ground to understand implications of things like disparate access to healthcare, really understanding where we do see these disparities and root causes of them, and advocating against some of the systemic causes of some of these inequities. So sometimes that means very lightly harassing city council members to adopt more humane housing and encampment clearance policies, even things like collaborating with coalitions like the Great Rise Minnesota to advocate for better social equity language around the recently passed cannabis bill, because we know that cannabis is one of the main or primary vehicles to criminalize Black communities. So Black communities in the Twin Cities should be first in line for any kind of profit to be received from that. And then more recently hosting a visit by the United Nations and civil society to hear testimony from folks who have been impacted by police violence, particularly murder of their family members, as well as folks who have survived incarceration and solitary confinement, to speak to the reality that, we do over incarcerate Black folks. The policing relationship is not healthy, and that we really need to revisit how so casually condone torture within our own state.
Well, that gives us a lot to talk about. I want to unpack each of the areas that you have brought up. Let me first introduce again Sister Catrice L. Williams, who's Director of Wealth Development. And Sister, good afternoon, welcome. You and I are neighbors here in North Minneapolis. I live on Thomas. You grew up on Sheridan, I think around the corner. How you doing?
Good afternoon. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. As Dr. Akibar said, everyone has an Urban League story, and I definitely have one. As a child of North Minneapolis, the Urban League was instrumental in my upbringing. And it's kind of like my full circle moment, coming back here to serve the community that is so near and dear to my heart. So I am excited for my time here in this role, and I'm excited to be here with you today.
Wonderful. I've got wind happening here, so we might be muting me from time to time to basically keep that from being a distraction. But talk about your growing up. I'm going to make this personal. Who is Catrice Williams? Where did she grow up? And what was the Urban League for you as a child? And you call this a full circle moment. I absolutely agree, because what you are and who you are and where you are right now is a fulfillment. And it's a movement in the continuum of progress for our families and for our community. So reflect on that spirit, that thought, and talk to me.
Well, I grew up at 911 Sheridan Avenue North, which is about 7 blocks from my office at the Glover Sudeth Center. Gary Sudeth is actually my uncle. My mom has been and was a long-standing member of the Urban League Guild. I attended elementary school at Willard Elementary, junior high at Franklin, and I am a proud graduate of North High School. Um, yes, go Polars. Polars in the house. So my entire upbringing has been in a 3-mile radius of the building where we sit. This is home. And I after college, after high school, I got a degree in sociology from Arkansas State University. And in that studying, I just really learned about a lot of the disparities that affect my people and how they affect our society and our economy as a whole. After college, I got a job as a banker, and I really wanted to bring the knowledge that I attained in that job as a banker back to my community. And as I have grown in, my professional space, I found this work in wealth development and affordable housing. And I just really kind of dug in because this is just really where I found my professional home. It is the purpose that I feel like God gave to me. And it has just been, it really hasn't been work. Um, just serving my community, bringing back knowledge and passion, and working in policy, collaborating with Dr. Akibar and other affordable housing agencies like PPL and Build Wealth and the Home Ownership Center, digging into policy work with the Home Coalition and Homes for All. It's just been a really amazing journey that has been full of learning, and I'm just getting started. And thank you for thinking that we are in our 20s.
Okay.
I was so flattered by that.
Well, if I had to guess, I'd put you guys both at around 23 or 24. And if you're older, that's good. That's a good thing.
I'll take it.
But I mean, and what I meant by that is simply that you are living and bringing youthful, vibrant energy, and that energy is invaluable. And so I salute the energy in you and praise you for being who you are. Wealth development. So take a minute, sister, and talk about the conundrum, the problem. I know we've heard it often, but it doesn't hurt for us to say it again in our own words. What is the challenge that we face in this community in Minneapolis and St. Paul about wealth and housing and associated things? Describe it in a nutshell for me.
In a nutshell, the state of Minnesota and more specifically the city of Minneapolis have one of the most egregious wealth disparities in the entire country between Black and white households. Our numbers in home ownership, in net worth, in access to housing, they all are honestly converse. So whereas 75% or so percent of white families own their homes and around 24% rent, we're the exact reciprocal. Only 24% of Black families actually own their homes. And in all of wealth building, in that conversation, we all know that owning the place that you live, owning the dwelling that you live is the cornerstone to building wealth. And we're not just talking about financial wealth. We're just talking about all of the disparities that plague our communities. That is, when you own your home, you have a more stable upbringing. You are more invested in your community. You contribute more to your community. Your schools are better. Your healthcare is better. And in the Black community here in Minnesota, because we lack that foundational piece to community investment, we fall behind, or we become victim to those disparities because we don't have that stake.
And so, what are the structural barriers? I mean, sometimes I'd say in the old days, people would say, "Well, it's where have we failed? What have we done? And what do we not know?" The operative approach here is that if there's blame to be placed, it must be on us for our failure or our inadequacy or our inability to organize and make things happen to build personally, collectively. But I submit that that is not true. That may be part of the story, but not the major part of the story. I submit that the story is a question of structure and a question of policy that we pay for that diminishes and devalues our existence, and that I think that we continue to fight against right now. What do you think, Charisse?
I would absolutely agree. I would absolutely agree.
Catrice, I said Charisse, Catrice, I'm sorry. Okay.
I heard Catrice, but
Okay.
I would absolutely agree. Everything from, denying families that were recently emancipated their due, to redlining, to the number of different policies, deed covenants, all of these things are in a culmination of things that have turned into barriers for Black families to be able to attain wealth. The lack of knowledge around finance, the mystery, the lack of access to lending, just there's a lot of access that we have been denied financially and economically as people, due to policy that has really set us behind. And thank goodness we are in a space now where people are recognizing it and moving us forward, helping us move forward, helping us champion the wealth work that our communities are due.
So as the wealth gap between Black folks and other communities persists, what role do you see for a combination, a multifaceted, coordinated approach that involves involves education, entrepreneurship, generational wealth building? How do we coordinate all of these modalities to have the impact that we're seeking, that we desire?
Well, it starts with the passion. It starts with the desire to move yourself forward. We have amazing programming here at Urban League Twin Cities. We have a very forward-thinking CEO, our interim CEO, who's at the helm of the organization, who is championing a number of initiatives that myself and my team are working on. Investment education around financial empowerment, budgeting, how to use your credit wisely. We are partnering with financial institutions like US Bank and Associated Bank and Wells Fargo to invest in the North Minneapolis community and the Twin Cities, the 11 county metro, to bring that education, bring that access back to our community. Here at the Urban League Twin Cities, we have homebuyer education, we have financial wellness education, and we are working on building out a third tier of our program that includes investment education and soon a venture capitalist group, so that our community members can learn how to build generational wealth in a space where they can find community and find an organization and people that they trust, and receive that education from people who look like them and who have, commonality, so that they can understand and build those sustainable, good habits toward wealth building and for them and their families and their future generations.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest today, we just heard Catrice L. Williams, Director of Wealth Development at the Urban League of Twin Cities. And prior to that, we'll go back to Dr. Alvin Akibar, Director of the Center for Social Justice Research and Policy, Social Justice Research, Policy, and Advocacy at Urban League of Twin Cities. And Dr. Alvin, let me pivot to you. I love that you both are kind of advocates and proponents, practitioners of data-driven research, data-driven decision-making. Research means a lot to you individually, but also to the point that it's incorporated and to the working title of the center, Social Justice Research, Policy, and Advocacy. So, Doctor, talk about that. Talk about your moving into how you approach research, how you approach data development, data acquisition, to what end? How do we as a community?
I think for me, I really. Go ahead. All right. Sorry about that slight connection issue. For me, I think research and lived experience are intertwined. We know, I think when you talk about your opinion that a lot of the rationales for the wealth disparities being a matter of blame on us not doing enough to meet the promise, when the evidence really kind of speaks to the fact that folks made systematic decisions, coded it into and woven into the fabric of our charters, of the way we do things. I think research can be a really helpful spotlight on where some of these issues both come from, what they look like, and even how they work. And so when I look at my work, I really try to approach both the systemic factors where I can, and just understanding the impact of those factors, to know that while I am a psychologist, your human individual, human individuality, our personhood has a limit to how much we can affect our own lives, right? You can try to plant a seed in a lot of different kinds of environments, and it will only grow in some of them, no matter how resilient the seed. So my goal is to both understand what we can do on the individual basis to improve our well-being, as well as understanding how we dismantle a lot of these systemic factors, messing with our ability to thrive. So that's included things like advocating for, again, like socially equitable policies through our Great Rise Coalition, as well as through the United Black Legislative Agenda, released with Reverend Hightower, working around just making sure that folks understand what's actually happening in the communities rather than relying on stereotypes. I know when you talk to some folks in the suburbs, they're convinced that Minneapolis has been on fire consistently. Reverend Dr. Hightower, but Minneapolis has been consistently on fire since 2020, and that nothing has really changed. And meanwhile, I'm looking outside at a beautiful day in North Minneapolis, right? Really understanding that a lot of the disparities are, while they exist, they don't necessarily come from blame. There's systemic factors at play here. And importantly, those systemic factors do not stand still, right? If you start rolling a boulder off the mountain, it's going to keep going unless something stops it. And so a lot of our policy advocacy comes in to really say that in addition to understanding what the problem is and what the solution is, we also have to stop the source of the problem so it doesn't continue to do further harm.
One of our viewers, Brother Mike V, asked the question, what are your guests' thoughts on UBI, Universal Basic Income, and UBM, which is Universal Basic Mobility, and baby bonds in the Twin Cities to address the economic gaps? Are you familiar with the concepts?
Yes.
Explain them and give me your thoughts. And let's have a discussion. Thanks, Brother Mike V. Baba Mike V. He's a colleague of mine in Nubia and is here all the time. Thank you, brother. Go ahead, Dr. Alvin.
Yeah. I think UBI, UBM, I've heard less about baby bonds, but the data and the evidence on those seems to be promoting what I think a lot of us understand implicitly, which is that, when people have what they need to survive, they will typically do a little better, even, and take more rest, take better care of their health, and still find ways to engage with their passions and engage with their communities, right? A lot of us aren't sitting around just like, oh, well, I got my rent paid, I guess I'm just going to sit here and do nothing. We're going to meet with our families. We're going to create things. We're going to try to get our own ideas off the ground. We're going to care for our loved ones, because that is all, while the economy is all fine and dandy, it's a signal of a healthy body as a physical, but the body needs all parts, not just the ones who are out there selling stuff, but the ones who are caring for those who are selling us our consumer society pieces. So I think a lot of the evidence so far seems to be suggesting that a UBI is a better way of approaching things than the absence of one. And I'm curious, I know a couple of trials have been started separately in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, and I'm excited to see what the data from those initial trials looks like. I think they're on slightly different timelines, but we should be seeing some of the early results from those over the next years.
Ones in St. Paul, not so aware of the ones in Minneapolis. But Catrice, you were nodding your head as we were talking about this. What are your thoughts?
I am an advocate for UBI and UBM. And a lot of trials around the world, in socialist countries, you see that when people, again, like Dr. Akibar said, when people have what they need, it makes our society better. Wealth disparities in general are bad for the economy. And while 1% of the population holds 99% of the wealth, though that creates egregious disparities that are no good for the 1% or the 99. So even in economies where they have a universal wage or universal mobility, they find that crime is lower. They find that healthcare disparities are smaller. They find that educational and achievement gaps are smaller. I am also excited to see the data that comes out of the trial in St. Paul. I did not know that there was a UBI trial going on in Minneapolis, but I'm excited to see the stats from that, and nerd out with Dr. Akibar over some pasta on them, because I am excited. I would hope, and I think that they will show us that it would be a positive direction to move in.
Take a minute and go deeper on the UBM, Universal Basic Mobility. What does that mean? How does it show up? And what do you know about where there have been successes anywhere in the country, around the world, in that arena? Catrice?
UBM, not so much. UBIs have been very successful in our neighbor upstairs, Canada, and a lot of the provinces there. Some European nations like Denmark, and a few of the other countries in the Netherlands have found success, and better mental health outcomes, better physical health outcomes. Just a much happier society, a much cleaner society. People tend to waste less. People tend to it has in other economies really just proven to be, I don't want to call it a cure-all, but it has significantly improved the quality of life for the citizens of those nations and of those provinces that have implemented that.
Let me go back to Dr. Alvin, brother. So take a minute and walk us through some of your key research and policy initiatives, either underway or under development right now. What is happening, and what can we look for as you continue to develop and deploy this work?
Yeah. So less formally, but we do a weekly Friday Fact series. So on all of the Urban League social media platforms, we try to put together a primer on current issues, interesting factoids about Black life experiences in Minnesota, and just kind of putting things in context, demystifying some of these things. In our more formal research endeavors, we've been working with researchers at the Dartmouth Institute and soon to be Johns Hopkins, looking at health equity, healthcare experiences, folks across the spectrum of gender, because we know that a lot of the canaries in the coal mines are how the worst of us are treated. And so understanding what some of these healthcare practices look like in context does tend to have those ripple effects. So we're working on preparing the manuscript for that to be submitted to a publication in a journal, as well as a couple of reports to be posted on CSJ's websites, as well as just out there into the world. We are working on publication. We actually just presented this work at the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, looking at the impact of school resource officers, both their presence and the opinion students have of them on students' well-being and mental health. And so the long and short of it is that for Black students, especially, having a school resource officer tended to be associated with anxiety, but that having like those more positive opinions of them can be a marker of some protection against things like anxiety, depression, and whatnot. And so it's really kind of a litmus test, or that kind of an illustration that we need that quality control, because while the presence can be a problem, but also having poor quality resource officers can also diminish student mental health across the board, but especially for Black and Indigenous students. And on the upcoming, we are working with Somali Communities for Settlement Services and Metro Youth Diversion on a project on violence prevention, especially around the Cedar Riverside area neighborhoods, and with researchers at the University of Pittsburgh's Program Evaluation Research Unit to understand the impact of equity language around a lot of the state's recent harm reduction and substance use policy measures that were passed to understand kind of where the implementation tends to go and what that looks like, especially for Black folks in Minnesota. So since we know a lot of these resources that tend to be shaken loose from these initiatives are not equitably distributed. So really trying to bring folks in the community as well as folks in the policy space together to understand both what that looks like and how we can implement this as equitably as possible.
So let me share with you what I call a classic Al McFarlane-ism. I say it all the time, and it's worth saying. In my experience as a reporter, I'm a journalist, I'm an observer. That's what I do. It seems to me too often we get the misery, they get the money. That's the Al McFarlaneism. We get the misery, they get the money. And what does that mean? It means that often the incentive is to maintain, manage, cultivate, and control the misery. It's like keeping it welled up in a dam and letting a trickle flow so that the trickle feeds the development of white people, of the white community. And so there is a general omnibus, in a sense, disregard of initiative, of solution making within our community, and they justify that skepticism as a sense of their feeling of their duty of stewardship of white culture, right? They are practiced, whether they say it or not. They don't have to say it because they are it. They are power, and they operate in a power dynamic that doesn't question, the apparatus that sustains them. It's understood, and they cultivate it. They teach it without saying it. It's how things work. Let me give you an example. When I was a reporter at the St. Paul Pioneer Press, I started my career in journalism back in 73, 74, like that. One of the critiques of journalism, of American journalism at the time, was that while the newspapers were beginning to report on the unrest, the urban unrest after the 60s and 70s, and they were in a sense, bringing shocking and jarring stories to light, sort of shattering the public peace that both Ozzie and Harriet and Fathers Knows Best, those systems reflected. But at the same time, the newsroom itself revealed the same set of disparities, set of exclusion, right? And the set of systemic privilege for white people without even discussing it. And blacks that wanted to be in the newsroom were suspect. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be in our world? We do this, right? And so I think a lot of that is exemplified across the board, has, from my point of view. And so my critique is that, and let me pay homage to Gary Sudduth. One of the most famous Sudduth-isms was, where's the money? Follow the money. And he publicly and consistently demanded, without apology, that we look at the cost, the revenue streams associated with problem solving. And if we discover that you all are making a business on our misery, we got a problem. And it's got to end now, and it's got to end here. What do you think, Dr. Alvin?
I think it hits the mark. I think even back to a lot of the discussion of affirmative action and people thinking that folks who end up in any position of power, agency, opportunity to advance themselves based on their own merits are looked at as, well, you're only here because of affirmative action. And even the statement itself is like, well, yeah, affirmative action has only happened because y'all were too racist to do it on your own, right? But the reality is that even as implemented, affirmative action predominantly benefited white women. Not Black folks, not Latino folks, not Indigenous folks, actually was used to really weaponize some rich East Asian folks against poorer East and Southeast Asian folks, right? Affirmative action was still, contorted into a tool of white supremacy because the machine is built to perpetuate that. So it takes a lot of work, sustained effort, and energy to push this to do anything other than what it's programmed to do, which is part of why I think it's important that we examine and criticize these systems. Again, we evaluate the impact as well as the proposition of the laws that are governing us, because government is just people, right? We can change. It takes a lot of us. We're all a pain in the butt sometimes, but if we all decide collectively to do something, we can change the way things will work, no matter how many different things are written down about it. It's a headache, it's a pain, but it's not impossible, and that's part of why I think it's important for us to empower communities with the information they need to mobilize those who have that spark to start leading, and we can continue to join in, because not everybody has to be marching in the streets. Some folks are filing some paperwork, some folks are caring for their others, but we can all activate in our unique role towards progressing towards a better society for all of us.
Catrice, talk about your family. I kind of want to personalize this again. I'm so glad you're here, number one. And if I'm getting too personal, just say, Al, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I'm an open book and an avid oversharer.
Okay, well, then this is going to be a great conversation. I want to hear about, and I got a reason for it, your family, your moms and pops and your grands and uncles, that picture of the community that before you were born was part of a universal conspiracy to bring you forth, right? And so what world did you arrive in? When and how have you developed levels of awareness and consciousness, say from 5 years old, 12, junior high school, university, and finally let it go to where the vision, you said something about this being a mission. I think you said that, or a life work. You used some language that said this is not just a job, that you got something else driving you, and I so appreciate that. So I want you to talk about that. And say any of it you want to.
Okay, we could just I believe that it started long before I was born. My grandmother's Ethel Davis, and my other grandmother on the other side of the river, Eloise Adams, they were both staunch advocates of equality and making sure that our children had the resources that they deserved, that they needed to thrive. A lot of even though I never met my grandmother Eloise, a lot of what they imparted in their children imparted in me of just a passion for making sure that people who look like I look, who look how I look, and come from places like the place that I come from, have access to the resources that it takes to make their wildest dreams come true. I remember getting my job at Wells Fargo and looking around and seeing no one that looked like me, and understanding why my grandma had a big bag of money in the back of her pantry and the distrust in the financial system, in, government, and how, my mom talks about aligning herself with Reverend Statton and Spike Moss and marching and, signing petitions and doing what it takes to move the needle. And you don't have to be the marcher, like Dr. Akibar said. You don't got to be marching. You don't have to be marching. I got invited to a policy conversation around housing in our housing units a few weeks ago, and there was a group of people and some Black-led organizations were talking about how, we don't know how to go to the Capitol. We don't know who to talk to at the door. And like Dr. Akibar says, people make government. You put these elected officials in office. Call them. And those are some lessons that I learned from my parents. Call them, ask the questions, hold them accountable. Figure out, align yourself with an urban league, an NAACP, a community organization that will show you, that aligns themselves with some policy organizations so that you can get your issues raised. You can move your agenda forward. If that is having access to equitable housing, seeing representation the in the positions, in the places that you go that are important to your survival, make sure that wherever you are, whatever you need, you're vocal about those needs. And I was having a conversation with my mom this morning, and this, much to her chagrin, I am now that person who does not shut up about what I need, even if it's a babysitter. So these are just things that, like, again, these are things that have been imparted in me from birth. I don't know. I just came out with them. And just a thirst for knowledge and a passion for people. My mom always, my mom's favorite verse in the Bible is like, or, favorite saying is, look, only what you do for the Lord will last. And I feel like, just listening to, I'm a woman of faith, and listening to, like, just, how and where God leads me, and following that, even if I don't necessarily have all the pieces together, or, know which way it's going to go, or, don't necessarily do it in the order that everyone else does it. It always seems to come together for my good. And that's just kind of how it works.
Dr. Alvin, let me switch to you. Same kind of question. What's your personal family story? I think you said you're from New York and came here from Texas, maybe. Talk about who you are, and in doing so, talk about your mom and your grands and your great grands. I love your name. How do you come by the name? Is it Akibar?
I'm changing my name to Alvin for the next interview.
I'll tell you a name story later on too. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah,
Alvin.
Absolutely. So my family is Nigerian. My mom immigrated here in the 80s and found herself in New York City with utilities due, 1 month old, and 2 years left in her or another year and a half left in her community college degree. And so she had to bust her butt. And so she kind of poured all those ambitions into me. So other kids, immigrants, probably get the same, like, you're like, all right, so you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, architect, like, which of those four are you going to pick? And then I picked none of them. I picked engineering for a while, decided that was not quite it. But she hammered home, like, that thirst for knowledge, and then the importance of education. And I think not just the educational piece of the formalized, but also what can you learn from the people around you, and how do you pour that back into the folks around you? So we've been very, I won't say lucky, but I'll say blessed since being here. I've born and raised in New York City, then Texas, now here, but finding myself in wonderful, loving, caring communities each place that I go. And I don't think it's an accident. I do believe in the power of prayer, and my mom's prayers for me constantly, like, because otherwise a lot of this wouldn't be working. But I think the real pouring back into community, taking care of people, is at the heart of what I do. So even in my doctoral studies, I was being told a lot of what I wanted to do was maybe a waste of a career, to quote one of my senior faculty, or that they didn't understand why certain disparities would play out in a different context, because they didn't read any of the stuff that we'd sent them ahead of time. But really trying to make sure that each place that I end up in, I try to make better where I can, being realistic about what's going on, and then also just getting to a point where I can use whatever skills, knowledge, connections I have to move the needle forward even a little bit, so we can have something more livable, because I think we can get there.
Akibar.
Say it again. I think you cut out.
Say your last name for me so I can pronounce it properly.
Oh, Akibar. So it is a combination of our Nigerian last names and some things at customs. So it's a unique name now by and large, and you'll kind of hear some folks think it's Akbar, which is often associated with folks of the Muslim faith, and Akiba, which is both Nigerian and then also randomly Japanese. But it's Akibar, or Akibar is what I go by, because it's my name to choose what I do with it. The name my mom gave me.
Great. And so, is your family lineage either Yoruba or Igbo, or do you know? Is your Nigerian
so no, we're not one of the
Yoruba?
three big tribes people know. Yeah. Okay. No, so we are Efik. So the Efik tribe is like southeast Nigeria, like very far south Nigeria, just in Cross River State, in Calabar. We make the best food. Don't come at me. Just try the food.
That would be Ibibio, right? Ibibio.
So Efik and Ibibio are ethnically linked but separate tribes. There's actually some tribal drama, and by drama I mean there was some
serious.
There's some serious stuff. No one is free of sin, and my tribe has some things to answer for as well. But I think the reality is that, especially in the legacy of colonization, when you bundle 500 or 250 ethnic groups with 500 languages together and call them a country, some stuff's going to get messed up.
Well, this is so wonderful. I'm glad to have you share this, because I think it's important that we find every way that we can to reconnect to our ancestry and to our presence, the process that has made us present here in the New World in the West. I do conversations with people that are Yoruba or Igbo who are in Brazil, in Bahia, and also with people who are in River State or in Lagos, right? And so I think the more we get to connect and see that we are connected, the better we become. We are able to share differently, to build together, understand that building and working together is a matter of both access, knowledge, and will, and belief that we deserve and we can do things differently, and that we can and that we will win, and that the winning that we're talking about doesn't depend on our destruction of other human beings. In fact, the winning that we represent is a winning that liberates all of humanity, brings us all to our best selves. That's what I believe anyway. Well, listen, I want to close out on giving you the chance to invite people to be aware and supportive of your programs. And I want to ask you both to work with me and my team to make sure that over the next several weeks, we bring in all of your colleagues who are leading initiatives in the Urban League of Twin Cities, and also some of the stakeholders, the partners you have, because I think it's important to talk about how we collaborate between organizations and with government and with the people on the street. So, let me ask you both to make the invitation, first of all. How do you please invite people to support you and to be aware of the work you do at the Urban League of Twin Cities?
Yes.
Well, I guess I can start. Here at Urban League Twin Cities, in the wealth development leg of the organization, we are here and open to serve our community. If you have questions about how to make your finances better, how to navigate the financial spectrum, if you're interested or curious about home ownership, we've got an amazing community event coming up August 12th called Keys and Q. It is a family reunion with a home ownership focus. So we've got some education, some access, real estate, and financial professionals there to answer your questions in a familial setting that is not clunky or really formal, that we are just here with the passion to serve our community and to elevate our community economody. We
got about a minute. Family Day. Let's give a go ahead.
We've got Family Day coming up. We've got a monthly homebuyer education, financial workshop, our financial empowerment workshop series. You can check those out on our social media. We have our annual Family Day coming up August 26th. If you are interested in learning more about us as an organization, our stakeholders, anyone in our community that we partner with or collaborate with, you will see them there.
We got to go. We're out of time. Listen, Catrice, Dr. Alvin, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you so very, very much. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.